You're listening to another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A deep dive into a classic show whose influence is immeasurable. Your next stop? Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and if this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast where I review the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology series. For archives of all of my episodes, you can visit anthologypod.com. You can also like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod and follow me on Twitter at OVAnthologypod. And every episode of this podcast will always be free, but if you'd like to support what I do here, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you can get access to exclusive content, exclusive audio content, like B-roll episodes, TV and book reviews, movie reaction recordings, commentary tracks, early access to podcast episodes, and previously unreleased content. For example, this particular episode of Anthology is kind of a special one because it's a few different reviews of the Twilight Zone, because it's the only Twilight Zone episode that had remakes in the 80s and 2002 series. And as such, I'm recording each of these sections separately, and what I'm doing is on Patreon. The people who support me on Patreon got access to each individual part early before the episode was released. So that's just a small fraction of the amount of stuff that I have on Patreon. I'm also doing episode reviews of Severance on Apple TV Plus, and I also, on the $5 level, do some Patreon potpourri things where I basically talk about a group of movies that I've watched recently. I've been on kind of a kick of doing sci-fi movies for that as well. But anyway, if you want access to that content, or if you just want to support me and show your support with money, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron over there. So today on the show, like I said, we have a very special episode. Today I'm reviewing not only one episode of The Twilight Zone, but 3 episodes. This is the only episode of The Twilight Zone that was remade in the 1980s series and in the 2002 series. So I'm going to be doing full spoiler reviews for Dead Man's Shoes, Dead Woman's Shoes, and Dead Man's Eyes. And what I usually do when I have a remake episode is I will watch and record my review of the original, and then, only then, is when I watch the remake. So at this point, I'm recording my review of Dead Man's Shoes, having not seen Dead Woman's Shoes or Dead Man's Eyes. So I'm very excited to kind of go through this whole project in this episode and see how I feel about it. And if you are an audio nerd, I'm using a different mic setup for each recording. I put the information in the show notes. I'm just weird like that. But that's not important. So, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this all kind of shakes out. And I do want to say just up top that I believe Dead Man's Eyes, the 2002 iteration of this story, since the 2002 series isn't streaming anywhere, and for that matter, I don't think the 85 series is either, but since the 2002 series isn't streaming anywhere and isn't readily available on physical media, I don't think that the DVD collection is out of print necessarily, but it's kind of hard to come by, I think. But anyway, Dead Man's Eyes is actually available as of this recording on YouTube, so you can watch that episode there. So anyway, like I said, this episode covering these three episodes, 3 iterations of the same story, told over 3 different iterations of the Twilight Zone. As such, I'm going to be spoiling each one of these episodes. So if you are watching along with me, or if you haven't seen the episodes, please go and watch it and then come back and listen to my review. So let's get into Dead Man's Shoes. It is the 18th episode of the Twilight Zone's third season, and it originally aired on January 19th, 1962. And let me go ahead and share my expectations for it, or what I knew before going into this episode. And honestly, I knew nothing. The only thing that I knew was that it was remade in the 80s and 2002 series. That's literally all I knew about it. I kind of assumed, judging strictly from the title of the episode, that it was a kind of walk a mile in my shoes type of story. And I had this idea in my head that maybe The Simpsons may have parodied it. I don't think that this was intentional, though. I don't think that this was the case necessarily. Well, I mean, it's pretty close. That's really interesting because... So, okay, peek behind the curtain. The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, over the years, has done several riffs on the Twilight Zone. For sure. And one of the kind of ideas that I have for whenever I eventually complete the Twilight Zone is to kind of do a special run of episodes where I talk about The Simpsons and how they were influenced by the Twilight Zone and how they parodied various Twilight Zone episodes. So I have a document in my notes app that has like a list of those. And I don't think that I have a specific... Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segment on there, which now that I've seen Dead Man's Shoes, I should put it on there. But anyway, in an early Treehouse of Horror episode, there was an episode where Homer gets a hair transplant. Oh God, I can't remember what the title was. A fun little pun on that kind of thing. Hell to Pay. So anyway, it's where Snake robs the Quickie Mart and is caught by the police, and he is I think he was smoking in the Quickie Mart, and then the police arrested him. That was his third strike, and they executed him. And he vowed revenge from beyond the grave on the people who kind of witnessed him and everything. And so Homer gets a hair transplant from Snake's corpse, and the hair takes control and causes him to murder the people that witnessed him in the Quickie Mart. But I think that that's more of a maybe Shocker reference. I don't know. But anyway, I thought before going into Dead Man's Shoes that maybe that was the basis for this. This episode was the basis for that Simpsons segment. So I don't know. But anyway, the long and short of it is, I didn't know what I was going into before I watched Dead Man's Shoes. And so with that out of the way, let me go ahead and read the plot summary, courtesy of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. for Dead Man's Shoes. And this is your final spoiler warning. I'm going to be spoiling the episode in its entirety starting now. So you've been warned, and here's the plot summary. The dead body of a hoodlum named Dane is disposed of in an alley. When a panhandler named Nathan steals the shoes and puts them on, the personality of Dane begins to take over. Visiting his apartment for a shower and a shave, Dane, now in the body of Nathan, orders his girl to be there when he gets back, and he sets off to conduct some unfinished business. Visiting a nightclub, he insists on meeting his former business partner, Bernie, to deliver a message. In Bernie's private office, Dane recounts how Bernie attempted to buy his partner out, and when the option failed, he killed Dane. Bernie starts to suspect that the spirit of his ex-partner has come back in the form of another man and tries to eliminate Nathan. Gunshots are exchanged from a hidden panel behind the bookshelf, and the body of Nathan drops to the floor. Bernie looks over the body as the man swears to his dying breath that, "I'll be back, Bernie, and I'll keep coming back again and again." After Bernie and his goons dispose of Nathan's body in the alleyway, another hobo comes along and, seeing the shiny pair of shoes, puts them on. So Dead Man's Shoes stars Warren Stevens as Nate Bledsoe of the Bowery Bledsoes, / Dane, technically. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in one episode of Rod Serling's The Loner in 1965, and he did appear in one episode of the 1980s Twilight Zone revival. Interestingly enough, it was not the remake of this episode. It was a different episode. On the other sci-fi anthology show front. He appeared in 2 episodes of science fiction theater, Time is Just a Place and Barrier of Silence. Time is Just a Place was covered in Anthology episode 53, and Barrier of Silence was covered in episode 75. So go back and check that out if you want to hear my reviews of those episodes of science fiction theater. And he also appeared in 1 episode of One Step Beyond called The Riddle, and 1 episode of The Outer Limits called Keeper of the Purple Twilight. And to further the pseudo Twilight Zone connections, Warren Stevens, that's his name, also appeared as Lieutenant Doc Ostro in Forbidden Planet. And co-starring as Daggett is Richard Devon. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he did appear in 2 episodes of One Step Beyond, 1 episode titled The Vision and 1 called Where Are They? And rounding out the cast is Joan Marshall as Wilma. This was her only episode of The Twilight Zone, and I couldn't really find anything else of note about her or any potential sci-fi stuff in her filmography, unfortunately. And writer for the episode was Charles Beaumont. This was his 11th Twilight Zone episode out of 22. We previously saw his work in the episode The Jungle, and next we'll see from him is The Fugitive later this season in episode 25. And director for the episode was Montgomery Pittman. This is his 4th of 5 Twilight Zone directed episodes. Previously, we saw his work in The Grave, and the next and final episode of the Twilight Zone directed by Montgomery Pittman is going to be The Last Rites of Jeff Myrtlebank, which is season 3, episode 23. Okay, so now with the talent rundown completely run down and everything, let me get into my thoughts as a first-time viewer of Dead Man's Shoes. So we open on a city street with a car that looks kind of flashy, but also very gangstery, pulling into an alley, and we see these kind of gruff or rough-looking gangsterish types pulling up in the car, and one says, okay, dump him. And we see that they just dump a body in the alley. And the body is face down. He's obscured. And I want to just mention this first, that I think that that's kind of an interesting choice. I mean, it's a vaguely interesting choice, but I think it's interesting how we never see Dane's face. The show gives us no indication of what Dane looks like in any respect, nor does it have to, because we don't need to know that or anything. But it is something that is kind of interesting, that his face is always obscured, or the body is like we never see what he looks like and everything, and that's kind of mirrored in the end scene with Nate. But anyway, this also got me wondering a little bit that, and this is eventually like disproven or not something in the it's something that it isn't corroborated in the text really anywhere, but this is a fun thought. Basically, I was wondering if there's a way to read the episode as Nate not being the first one to wear Dane's shoes. Like, what if they are dumping the body of the first person to wear Dane's shoes, or the second person to wear Dane's shoes? What if there's this like conveyor belt, like factory assembly line of these men who come after Bernie because Bernie killed Dane, and Dane is inhabiting these bodies and everything? Because when we get to the scene with Bernie and Dane in the office, in Bernie's office, it's a little bit vague, but it does kind of, like, that is a huge hole in the in this story or in this theory that I have and everything anyway, because the way that they kind of play it out and everything. And then you have to ask, like, okay, well, if that's the case, then why did Wilma not, like, I'm thinking about this in terms of like several days have passed with different Danes coming after Bernie, but I kind of feel like that would kind of cause concern for Wilma in a different way. Anyway, with her not seeing Dane for several days. That would be kind of tricky. So anyway, it's a fun thought. But so as we continue on in this opening, like the prologue, we see our first glimpse of Nate as he is sitting on the fire escape. And at this point, like a genius, I put in my notes, I'm assuming he's going to take the dead man's shoes. So I get 10 points for being a nice deductive reasoning guy. And I really liked the visual style of this. And I like how a lot of things are mirrored at the end of the episode in different ways. So there's this really cool shot of Nate as he's looking at Dane's body. And the camera is positioned like behind the fire escape, but behind the stairway. And we're seeing him through like the slats in the fire escape steps. And his face is just kind of perfectly framed there. And then when the camera reverses over to the body, in that frame is the shoe. Like the shoe is visible in that frame in kind of the same way. And I don't know. I just like that as a visual kind of technique, I guess you would call it. But I thought that was really appealing and everything, and put some cool importance on the shoes. And another interesting thing about this prologue is that there is no dialogue really, aside from the gangster saying dump him. And we get no dialogue until Serling comes on screen. And I like that. I think that it's pretty cool to kind of see this man kind of rummaging through the pockets of this dead body. And it's giving this, I don't know, it's giving this kind of interesting, I don't want to say feral, definitely not feral, but it gives off this energy of like, yes, this is a man who is accustomed to, tragically so, I would say, accustomed to scouring the area for things that he can use to live. And that's horrible. There's some stuff that we can pick apart there, but I think it's interesting that there's no dialogue. There doesn't need to be any dialogue with him rummaging through, because you know what he's doing, you know what he's about, you know why he's doing this, what he's looking for and everything. There's nothing that makes you think that, he knows this man. Like there's nothing like that. It's very straightforward. So he finally gets to the shoes, and as he's putting on the shoes, we get the camera pans over, and we see Serling enter the picture, and he starts his monologue and is describing Nate Bledsoe, which I will go ahead and play the narration now. What I will say beforehand is that I was a little confused at first, the first time I was watching it, because I didn't know if he was talking about the dead man or he was talking about Nate, because I didn't know either name yet. But anyway, here's the here's the opening narration for Dead Man's Shoes.
Nathan Edward Bledsoe of the Bowery Bledsoes. A man once, a specter now. One of those myriad modern-day ghosts that haunt the reeky nights of the city, in search of a flop, a handout, a glass of forgetfulness. Nate doesn't know it, but his search is about to end, because those shiny new shoes are going to carry him right into the capital of the Twilight Zone.
So I want to point out how interesting it is that he refers to Nate Bledsoe as being of the Bowery Bledsoes. And I kind of think that that's an interesting sort of, I don't know, my read of it. I could be completely wrong, but I kind of feel like that is the read of it is this kind of cheeky, tongue-in-cheek kind of thing of like, he comes from like the family from the Bowery, like the family name of Bledsoe holds some weight in the Bowery. And Bowery is like, I looked it up because I know like Bowery Boys, but I don't know exactly what that is. But it's an area in Lower Manhattan, and I don't know if that's part of what I'm thinking is a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek nature of it. The fact that it's just like this area in Lower Manhattan, maybe it's known for kind of the homeless people. I don't know. But anyway, I just kind of thought that was a little fun, like kind of tongue-in-cheek. And then there's also this like little pause that he does when he says a glass of forgetfulness, which I think is kind of an interesting physical choice for Serling there. And the last thing about the opening narration is that, like, I know that this happens in pretty much every opening narration, but I've just got to say that I really like it when the opening narration calls back or calls attention to the Twilight Zone as a physical place. So like here, when he says that the new shoes are going to carry Nate Bledsoe right into the capital of the Twilight Zone, I don't know, there's something about that I really like, because the Twilight Zone is obviously not real. It's not a real place, but it is ubiquitous. It is this sandbox that Serling and company can play in. And I just like when it's described as being a physical place. So when we come back from the narration, Nate is walking with the shoes and he's interrupted by someone who seems friendly. And I kind of thought for a second that it was kind of a false friendliness, because he seems kind of confrontational. But as we come to learn, it's just another homeless person that Nate knows, and he suspects that Nate has gotten his hands on something valuable. And this is an interesting way to kind of bring us into Nate's world, and get to know like what his whole kind of thing is through dialogue with a friend of his. And then we get this second guy that comes up and he offers to defend him in court. And that's fun. That's kind of cute. He's very animated and theatrical in the dialogue, which I think is fun. And he also kind of falls in the same line as the first guy, and he suggests that Nate share whatever windfall he's gotten himself into or has discovered for himself, because they notice that he's walking differently and he's got some really nice shoes. And throughout this scene, this is where I get kind of a little bit muddied or confused about the central setup, which I'm not going to dig too deep into it because I don't know. It's just kind of a little bit of it could turn into a little bit of a dive down a rabbit hole that I don't need to, because I'm likely just overthinking it. But I'm curious at this point, at what point does Nate become Dane? Because throughout this scene, he's kind of playing it coy and silent. He is mentioning to them that he found the shoes and that he isn't really saying exactly what. And at this point on repeat viewings, I kind of thought like, oh, is Dane kind of sizing up his situation? Is he saying these things so that he can kind of just size things up or what have you? But it also just isn't. I don't think that's the case, because he goes so far as to show them the shoes, and Nate even says that they feel funny. And at this point, I kind of wondered if this is the magic of the shoes, if it's them being delayed, like if the magic is being delayed, and that like I was thinking that maybe he put on the shoes, and when he put on the shoes, his consciousness was fighting Dane's for control. And I think that makes a little bit of sense. But then I noticed, like immediately after that, he looks in the mirror. And I think that that's the trigger. I think that that's what switches him completely over to Dane's persona, because he just seems more confident. He has this expression on his face. He's doing this body language thing that shows that he's not someone who's been scavenging. He's not a specter, as Serling said in the opening narration. He is a confident man who probably is up to no good. And I just think that that's the moment when he turns into Dane. And I don't know if there's. I'm kind of confused as to why that would be the case. Or if that's just when Dane recognizes what's happening or realizes what's happening, because maybe he was Dane as soon as he put the shoes on, but he wasn't sure what was happening until he saw that he was a completely different person. But also that doesn't really track all that much for me. So I don't know. It's ultimately not an issue by any stretch, but it's kind of weird to it's easy to overthink the mechanics of this episode. So the second man that came up, that offered to defend him, asks if he found anything else. And that's when they kind of point out the shoes, or no, that's when the first guy that came up tries to stop Nate and ask where he got the shoes, and then Nate turns and tells him to get off of him and walks away. And at that point, I didn't realize exactly what was happening the first time because, the nature of the podcast. I didn't know what the episode was about. But at that point, Nate just was immediately projecting much more confidence and more aggression. Like he says this in a way that is very confrontational and very much like, don't mess with me kind of attitude. And I really like that because that's full on Dane at that point. So Nate/Dane arrives at the Chateau Beechwood, and it was kind of neat because the shot of him walking focuses the camera, like the camera focuses on the shoes and then goes up. So it's just really interesting to see like the camera is pointing out like, yes, the shoes are the magic element, and that's the first thing we're going to show you of this man. And then we're going to just pan up to where he is, where you actually see his face. And at that point also, there's that close-up on his face. In my first viewing of it, I really wondered if the close-up on his face was supposed to show us that it's a different actor. That's not the case. It's not that it's not a different actor or anything. It's just to show that I guess he's cleaned up. But really, it's more so to show that it's just the look of a different person behind the face. It's the same face, but it's a different person behind it. And that's kind of a good way to kind of demonstrate it by showing the facial expression of him in contrast to him as Nate. So, so he walks into the apartment where Wilma is there. And before he gets into the building, there's a couple walking out of the building that do like a double take, and I'm kind of torn between. I don't know if it's meant to imply that it's just strictly because of the nature of what they're seeing, this homeless man with very expensive shoes. That's weird. Or if it's that they recognize the shoes as Dane's and they're afraid because they think it's Dane because they're kind of looking down at first, and then they do the double take to see him because they're like, wait, that's not Dane. And maybe that's to kind of pinpoint to us or show us that, this Dane person is someone to not mess with. So when he gets into the apartment, Wilma greets him without seeing him, and then she sees that it's not him and freaks out naturally. And Nate as Dane, he goes and is very comfortable. He drinks from Dane's bottle, and Wilma tells him that Dane will kill him if he finds him in there drinking from his own bottle. And that's when Nate addresses her as Wilma. And that's at that point I realized, like, okay, Dane has taken over. It's a Ghost Shoes story. And at that point, I also thought this shares a little bit of similarity in style to The Four of Us Are Dying to a certain extent. It's both about, central characters that are not very likable characters per se. They are characters that have a bit of, rough around the edges, and they have criminal backgrounds, basically. But I will say that one of my main points of confusion for The Four of Us Are Dying, I'm not going to say criticisms, I'm not going to say complaints, because I do like that episode, and I think that technically speaking, in terms of filmmaking, it is impressive. But one of the things that kind of stuck in my craw with The Four of Us Are Dying is that the opening narration mentions that the main character is a man who with a master plan to destroy some lives, and I struggled really hard to figure out, like, what is this master plan of his? And I kind of feel like this episode, Dead Man's Shoes, almost pays off that promise for that episode, because this is a revenge story of Dane going after Bernie to avenge his own death. And I think that that's a really interesting concept, and he has this plan to do that. He goes to the nightclub, he goes to Bernie, he gets Bernie alone. So I don't know. So Anyway, so Nate then kind of brushes past Wilma and goes to the bedroom. He gets a gun out, goes into the bathroom to shave and change. Then we get this interesting cut to Wilma on the phone, and she's talking to Bernie. She says, "Hey, Bernie, it's Wilma. Is Dane there?" And Bernie presumably says no, and so she tells him that as soon as he sees Dane, to have him come to her, and she's at the apartment. It's important. And at that point, I was kind of curious because I didn't know exactly how that was going to factor in. But once we get introduced to Bernie later in the episode, I'll have more thoughts on that. But I kind of thought at this point, like, I wonder, once it was revealed who Bernie was, I was like, wait, is Wilma in on it? Like, how is this a thing? But Wilma is obviously dropped at that after this point. And I think that there's a little bit there that could have been done, but, it's fine. So I really like Warren Stevens' performance as Nate and Dane, especially in this scene, because he moves to take the shoes off, and as he's doing that, you can kind of sense, or you can kind of see that the wave come over him of changing personas, changing consciousnesses, and changing just overall body language. Like, at this point, he's no longer Dane now that the shoes are off, and there's this look of just sheer confusion and terror on Nate's face, and we get that close-up. And I think that that's why they did the close-up of Dane's face outside of the building, because when we get this close-up of Nate's face, we see that it is a different person behind that face. And yeah, so I kind of really like that. But as he comes out of the bathroom, Wilma confronts him at gunpoint, and it's at that point that I realized in my first viewing, oh, he's Nate without the shoes, and he's Dane with the shoes on. Got it. Okay, cool. So Wilma then interrogates him. She threatens to kill him, I think a couple of times, and he is just like freaking out because he doesn't realize how he got there, who she is, what's going on. And so he pleads with her not to kill him, and then, still at gunpoint, she tells him to put the shoes on and leave. So he does, and that's when he becomes Dane. And this is an interesting thought that I kind of had. At what point, like, what happens to Nate when Dane takes over? And I think to one of my favorite, books of all time, The Drawing of the Three by Stephen King. It's book 2 of the Dark Tower series. Check out Tower Junkies, my Stephen King podcast with Tiny. But I wonder, like, where is Nate when Dane is taking over? Because we know that Dane is dead. Dane is a dead person. He is a spirit wandering the world. But Nate isn't dead. Nate is alive and well. So what happens to his consciousness when Dane takes control? And it's probably just experiences like a blackout effect. But I kind of like the idea of Nate being trapped in the mind a little bit. I think that would be kind of an interesting thing to think about. So anyway, Dane tells Wilma, like, I thought I told you to mix me a drink. He's very kind of suave, douchey gangster guy. He's exuding a lot of confidence, and she can kind of tell that it's Dane now, specifically because of his demeanor and body language. And so she kind of goes back to the phone, but then sets it down and doesn't make a call or anything. She's kind of thinking things through. She's kind of noticing that. And that's when Dane comes out of the bedroom completely changed. And I think that at that point, because before he goes back into the bedroom, he takes the gun from her, first of all. And then he kind of eyes the gun. And I think that that's supposed to imply that that's the gun that he put at his ankle, that he uses at the end of the episode. But anyway, so after he's come out and he's changed and everything, he asks about the drink, and he asks her to make him a tequila with a cube of sugar, which I really like that kind of level of detail, because it's obviously used. This is our introduction to that, And it is our introduction to knowing that that is Dane's drink. And that is paid off very well because here in a couple of scenes, he's going to be at the nightclub and he's going to order it very loudly to get the attention of Bernie and the kind of group of gangsters and the woman there. And I just really like that as just a breadcrumb that pays off in a couple of scenes. So Wilma and Dane have this conversation. She asks who he really is. And at that point, he's kind of toying with her and comes over and just kisses her. And we get it's a little bit of a salacious scene. I thought that this was kind of interesting for, 1960, where are we at? 1961, 1962 at this point? But it's kind of salacious because she's like, he's like, who am I, baby? And she's just moans his name, Dane, in his ear. And I was just like, wow, it was 1962. That's a little, like I said, it's a little salacious. I'm not like a prude or anything or at all. I'm just like, wow, okay. Yeah, they did that. Cool. It's nothing too, like, it's not like hardcore porn or anything, but I'm just thinking in terms of like 60s television. I'm surprised that they were able to have something that draped in a pseudo eroticism in it. And maybe I'm just putting too much out there for that. But anyway, Wilma freaks out, starts crying, asks what happened to Dane, and then 60s television, 60s gangster, I should say. He slaps her across the face and tells her that he has unfinished business and tells her to make sure she's still there when he gets back. And I just have in my notes before the commercial break, this Dane fella, not good people. And then we get the commercial break. And when we come back from the commercial break, we see the nightclub and Dane enters. And at that point, it feels even more like the four of us are dying to me because of the, nightclub scene, really. And so he goes up to the bar and he orders a tequila with a cube of sugar. But he says it very loudly, specifically so Bernie at the table right next to him can overhear him. And so Bernie asks the people at the table, like, hey, do you know who that is? And they're like, no, I've never seen him before in my life. And that's when the bartender, I liked this little detail that the bartender says, like he's like, hey, you like to live dangerously, don't you? And then Dane is just kind of like dismissive, like, oh, am I? I didn't know. I thought that was a nice little detail because that kind of gives us some good context for Bernie and Dane's reputation in this kind of criminal underworld kind of thing. So Bernie, has one of his flunkies bring Dane over, and they meet, and at that point we realize, like, okay, Mr. Daggett is Bernie because Dane says, like, oh, hey, Bernie, and I wondered at that point, like, I wondered if Wilma was involved with the murder somehow, but then I put in the notes, like, probably not, because I'm pretty sure that we don't see Wilma again, or we won't see Wilma again. So Daggett asks him, or Bernie asks him what his name is, and he just says that he's a messenger and that the message is one that he needs to deliver privately, and it's a touchy subject. And I kind of really like the underlying sense of danger in the dialogue, like the subtext of it all, knowing that it's a dead man inhabiting this body, saying these words, trying to get Bernie alone. You can just feel that intensity and that underlying sense of danger. And I just really like it because that is competing with Bernie's energy in the conversation, where his energy is just incredibly cautious confusion. And he's not understanding what's going on, but he knows that there's kind of trouble brewing. And I really like that. So they go into the office, and Bernie makes the offhanded remark that you can't get more private than this. Even the walls are soundproof, which kind of explains why what happens is able to happen. And so they frisk Dane, take the gun off of him. And I really liked the kind of gangster dialogue aspect of this where for whatever reason, like, it's not established that it's any, like, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny. Like, the episode airs in January, and it's not contingent. The episode storyline is not contingent on any date range at all. Like, there's nothing to the date. Yet, when one of the gangsters takes the gun off of Dane, he says, like, "Oh, well, Happy Easter. Here's a gun." I'm just like, "Oh my God, huh." I just realized something, but he takes the gun off of him, and he says Happy Easter, and I really like that because then Dane says, like, the cool, suave, confident gangster kind of reaction where he's like, "Yeah, tell the Easter Bunny here that I'm gonna need that gun back when I leave," and I really like that, but I just realized that it's weird because, like, he's referred to as Easter, but it's interesting, and I don't know if this is the case. I don't know if this is the reason why Easter was referenced or whatever, but Easter is marking the occasion in Christianity that Jesus was crucified, he died, and then 3 days later was resurrected. Like, I think that's why they referenced Easter in this, because this is about a man who died and then came back to life. And I'm like, I had no idea until this moment, and I kind of love that. So anyway, so Dane gets Bernie in the room in private, and he starts asking questions. He asks Bernie how he got the rug clean so fast. And like, I loved that too, because at that moment I was like, "Oh dang, that's where they murdered him right there. Holy crap, that's awesome." And I also felt a little bit conflicted in this moment because I paused it and I noticed, like, oh, there's only 4 minutes left in this episode. And I felt like on that first viewing that a lot of time had been spent leading up to this moment. And I kind of wished that the episode would have dealt more with Nate and Dane meeting with different people in Dane's life, kind of to call back to my comparison to The Four of Us Are Dying. I kind of wish that this episode, at that point, this episode would have been about Dane in Nate's body exacting a multi-person revenge plan. But I'm fine with what we got. It's fine. It's one murder. It's one revenge. I'm good with it. So I just thought it was kind of interesting because at that point I was like, well, yeah, there's 4 minutes left. I'm not sure how they're going to wrap this up. I don't know how this is going to be concluded. And that's also, I will say this, after that, like, little complaint that I had, immediately after that, the episode does something that I found really interesting. It goes into what caused Dane to be murdered. And Dane explains to Bernie that that the message has to do with, there was a man who had it good. He had a lot of stuff going on and everything. He was able to make money, and then his business partner wanted to buy him out of the business. And when that man refused, that's when Bernie murdered him. And it's interesting that we get that exposition, we get that storyline with like 3.5 minutes left in the entire episode. And as I was rewatching the episode and making my notes and kind of formulating my thoughts, I came to really like the way that this episode holds back the drama of Dane's murder until nearly the end of the episode for 2 reasons. One is that it allows the episode to play with that Twilight Zone element with a little bit more freedom and just be more free with it. And the other thing is that the episode kind of just assumes or presupposes for the audience that Dane is not a likable person. He's not a person who really deserves to be empathized with in his quest for vengeance and everything. And I kind of like that because we don't even get like any backstory until this moment. And I don't know, there's something about that I really liked. So yeah. So anyway, Then we get the kind of climactic moment where he's delivering the message, and it's revealed that he had a gun on his ankle. And that's when it gets it's very fast paced and very interesting, because we see Bernie look over at a fake mirror, and we see the mirror just kind of go away or get opened up, and Dane just immediately shoots the guy that comes out of it to kill him. And he asks Bernie if he thought that trick would work twice in a row, which I think is great, because that tells us that, like, oh, that's what happened moments earlier. That's what happened early in the, like, before the start of this episode. That's how Dane was killed. But then almost immediately gunshots ring out from the bookcase behind Bernie. And Dane falls to the ground, and he says his last words, "I'll be back, Bernie, and I'll keep coming back and again, and I'll get you. So help me, I'll get you." And first of all, I kind of like the the kind of weird, like almost Groundhog Day aspect to it, to a certain extent. The idea of Dane just constantly going back, like, I don't know. It's just, it's funny to me, because it makes me think that, like, oh, then the next person who comes as Dane is going to go, he's going to know to shoot behind the mirror. He's going to know to shoot behind the bookcase. And then Bernie's maybe going to have a third person that will be in a position. And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. One to the other. So I don't know. I kind of like that as an idea, and everything. But anyway, so then we get the denouement of the episode. The gangsters dump the body just like before, and a second homeless man approaches. Same type of shot through the stairs on the fire escape. And it's just, it's kind of framed really neatly. And the man thinks that Nate is drunk. And I was wondering if he was the second man from earlier in the episode, the guy who kind of said, like, oh, I'll defend you in court and everything. But I don't think so. I actually don't think that that's the case. But anyway, the man puts on the shoes. The camera pans up, Serling starts talking, and the cycle continues. And yeah, so I will go ahead and play the closing narration from Rod Serling right now.
As for these, we'll discuss them at some future date.
There's an old saying that goes, if the shoe fits, wear it. But be careful. If you happen to find a pair of size 9 black and gray loafers made to order in the old country, be very careful. You might walk right into the Twilight Zone.
So I will say that I kind of wish that the final moment of the episode, I kind of wish that final scene, I wish that it would have stuck with the new homeless guy like a couple seconds longer, because I wish we could have seen him turn into Dane to kind of really give that cyclical, like, repetitiveness aspect to it. But it's a minor gripe and everything. It's fine the way it is. So overall, I felt like Dead Man's Shoes was a pretty decent episode. And like I've been saying throughout this review, it feels like it was very much a riff on The Four of Us Are Dying, even down to the protagonist being killed. But I guess that there was enough to differentiate it from that episode. But what I found kind of weird, not weird necessarily, but this is one of those episodes that I feel like doesn't have like any kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really have a lesson or a moral lesson in the text. Unlike last week's episode, One More Pallbearer, which I kind of feel like that's maybe sort of standard with gangster episodes, although Nervous Man in a $4 Room definitely deals with some like moral stuff and everything. But I don't know. I just kind of feel like there's a little bit in terms of the subtext that isn't fully realized in this episode, but it doesn't need to be. It's entertaining in its own right, and overall, like I said, it is pretty solid. It's pretty entertaining, and it leaves on a slightly dark tone. Also, the fact that like Nate Bledsoe is just killed, like he's dead now. Like this is a person who lost his life for no reason at all. And there's going to be just an endless stream of dead people that are coming from, that are Dane is inhabiting just to get his revenge. So I don't know. It's kind of dark. It's a little bit of a dark turn at the end. So I don't know. Anyway, a couple pieces of trivia before I move on to my next review. But a couple things is when Daggett asks for Nate's name at the nightclub, Nate says Kilroy. And according to, I think it was IMDb trivia, this could be a reference to the World War I or World War II urban legend Kilroy was here. And one theory is Kilroy was thought to be an Allied spy. And at first I thought, oh, that seems like a little bit of a stretch. But after reading that and then rewatching the episode, the guy sitting across from Bernie, as soon as Dane says that his name is Kilroy, he gets very indignant. He's like, now come on, blah, blah, blah. And then Bernie like immediately cuts him off. And I thought that leads credence to that piece of trivia. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And the only other piece of trivia is that obviously this was, remade in the 80s and in the 2002 Twilight Zone. But the only other piece of trivia is that Warren Stevens, as I said before in the talent rundown, was in a episode of the 80s Twilight Zone. He would play Major Whitmore in, I think it was the segment A Day in Beaumont, or it might have been The Last Defender of Camelot, but it was in 1986. So eventually at some point I'll get to that, but we'll see. So anyway, that's my review for Dead Man's Shoes. And yeah, now I'm going to go ahead and go into my review of Dead Woman's Shoes from 1985. So stay tuned for that. Once again, Patreon supporters got access to this early. So just another thing before I switch over to Dead Woman's Shoes. Check out Patreon, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. All right, well, stay tuned for my thoughts on the 1985 Twilight Zone episode, Dead Woman's Shoes. And now here I am with my review of Dead Woman's Shoes, which was a remake of Dead Man's Shoes in the 1985 Twilight Zone revival. It's the first segment of the 9th episode from that first season of of that iteration of the Twilight Zone. And this episode originally aired on November 22nd, 1985. And I do want to mention that I didn't realize this when I recorded the last segment, but this episode is actually also available on YouTube. So you can watch the episode in its entirety on YouTube. I put a link in the show notes and everything. So there you go. It's on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it and then come back and listen to my review because I'm going to be spoiling this episode. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and share how I would have remade it for the 1980s revival had I been involved in the process or alive at that time even. So I put in my notes, this is something that I wrote out before I watched this episode, but I would probably have changed it from a gangster storyline, and then I basically probably would have made it more personal, I guess. And I put, judging from the title of the episode, I'm guessing they changed it to something else. Given that it was the 80s, I would think about maybe making it about a yuppie coked out business person instead of a gangster, and have them being murdered after a bad business deal and then coming back to life for revenge. And part of me would also, after having recorded the last segment, I kind of wish that, I think that I would make it more of a multi-faceted, multi-part revenge plot. Yeah. And then I put as an added bonus in terms of what I think that I might be getting myself into with watching this episode. I put, given that the episode title is Dead Woman's Shoes, I wonder if it has anything to do with fashion. And I was wondering that because I kind of wondered if it was going to go the route of, like, instead of a gangster thing, maybe it's like something like a kind of Devil Wears Prada kind of thing, like a fashion world kind of thing. So those were kind of my expectations or thoughts going into this episode of The Twilight Zone from 1985, and the plot summary, courtesy of IMDb, is Dead Woman's Shoes. A meek thrift store. Wow. Okay. A meek thrift store clerk is possessed by the spirit of a dead woman. So it's pretty. I don't know. Sparse there in terms of the plot summary. And I do want to mention before I get into the talent rundown and everything that this is the last Twilight Zone episode to be remade in the 1985 series or the 2002 series for that matter. Of course, we have Kick the Can coming up, and we have Nightmare at 20,000 Feet in season 5 that were both remade for the movie. But this is the last of the original Twilight Zone episodes to be remade in a Twilight Zone TV revival. As far as I can tell, I'm like 99.9% sure of that. So, okay, so let's go into the talent rundown. Dead Woman's Shoes, very surprising to me because I had no idea, stars Helen Mirren as Maddie/Susan. Well, I guess technically just Maddie because we do see Susan in this. And then it co-stars Jeffrey Tambor as Kyle and Teresa Saldana as Inez. And writer for the episode was Lynn Barker. Of course, with a story by credit or from the teleplay of based on the teleplay by Beaumont. And director was Peter Medak. And yeah, so let's go into my review of Dead Woman's Shoes. So I'm sure that I said this in my review of Shadowplay, the remake in the 80s Twilight Zone, but every time I see an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone, I can't help but feel like the opening theme music just feels so dull to me in comparison to the original series. There's just something to it. It's a little too subtle and slow for me. It doesn't really, it's not until that kind of build up at the end where it kind of really feels like the Twilight Zone. And that always just kind of gets me a little bit. But we open on a shot of a very cute little dog named Fritz and a housekeeper who is gathering some things and putting some things together on the bed. And then we have the entrance of Kyle Montgomery, played by Jeffrey Tambor, who I was surprised to see him in it. Because I didn't know that he was in a Twilight Zone episode, but obviously I know him best from Arrested Development, and he was also on Transparent, but I haven't seen that. So we learn that he just recently lost his wife in some kind of an accident. It's kind of vague. It's kind of vague when he says that, and he says that he can't help. It hurts to see his wife's belongings. As Inez, the housekeeper, is packing everything up. And then he says, because he says, I thought we sent those to the thrift store. And she said, no, not these yet or whatever. And then he says, it's an interesting scene because we're introduced to this scenario. We find out from him that his wife just recently passed away. He says the somewhat performative, kind of grieving husband thing of like, oh, it hurts to see her stuff and everything. But then in the next breath, he says, just make sure you take it to the thrift shop and make sure you get a receipt. And like that just feels just so cold. And that gives us our first hint that, oh yeah, he murdered his wife. Which is pretty expected, but I like the way that that's done. I like the way that that's introduced. And then from there, we get the opening credits of the episode. And the opening credits are shown to us while the camera is showing Helen Mirren's feet walking to work. And I kind of liked that. Like she is walking, and it's kind of confusing because I thought for a second, like, oh, is this the housekeeper walking to drop off the stuff? But it's not. So anyway, it's Maddie, played by Helen Mirren. She's walking to work, and I really like the amount, I find it interesting how much personality and character is in that movement, and how the focus is on her shoes. And as she's walking, like, we get the impression, like, she is very timid, she is very shy, she is kind of, maybe the world around her is a little aggressive in and of itself, but she's walking through, and she's kind of getting out of people's way. She's bumping into people. It's kind of awkward. It kind of goes on just a little bit too long, but I appreciate what it's doing for the character and the personality in introducing us to Maddie and demonstrating. It goes a long way to demonstrate later how vastly different she is from Susan. And it also gives us a pretty interesting way to bring us into the episode and show us the opening credits. So as she gets into the store, we learn that her name is Maddie. She's late for work, and she works in a thrift store. And then we get this, I don't know. I thought that the two kind of party girl, shop girls that are kind of cackling at the dress and everything, they were so over the top. We see these two girls who are dressed like spandexy 80s jazzercise attire, denim. I don't know, but like I know that this was made in 85, but I'm just like, this feels like such an 80s stereotype. That is so hilarious. But anyway, they're cackling, they're laughing, and then Maddie goes up and asks if she can help them with anything. And it's just so over the top. Like, they are so loud and so obnoxious, and they're just taking it straight to 11. And they say, like, oh, well, maybe you should try on this dress because then maybe it'll improve your love life. And then they walk away. It's just really, it's dumb. It's kind of, it didn't work for me. So then this demonstrates that Helen Mirren as Maddie is sad, shy, she's reserved, she's timid, she's not comfortable in her skin. And I've got to say at this point also, I kind of forgot that they don't do, in the 80s show, they didn't do opening narration, and I don't like that. It just feels off. It doesn't feel like the Twilight Zone to me. So anyway, she then is kind of rummaging through some stuff. She opens a box of the donations for, or the whatever for, that has the shoes, and she picks up the shoes, and then she's interrupted by this guy who, again, this guy, like, this character is going to 11. He is very aggressive with hitting on her. He's dressed like a 50s greaser, and it just like a pompadour and everything. And it's so off-putting, but he hits on her very aggressively. He says, I'd like to buy something. I'd like to buy you something. And then he even moves in like way too close to her and like gets way, way, way too close to her. Almost like pats her cheek, but then pulls his hand back and like brushes his hand through his hair and stuff. But she then kind of panics, and while still holding the shoes, she says she needs to go back to the storage room, or to the storeroom, and she'll be right back. So she goes back and she puts the shoes on. And I found this scene interesting because she is sitting in a chair kind of facing a mirror. And now that I'm thinking about it, I should have gone back and rewatched this section, because I thought that was an interesting, part. That was an interesting thing, interesting kind of connection to the original series episode, because in the original series episode, it's really not until he looks in the mirror on the street that he turns into Dane. And here we have her directly in front of a mirror. And I thought that was kind of an interesting nod to it. To the original. But given that later in the episode we see Susan's reflection in the mirror when she is Susan in Maddie's body, I'm kind of wondering if there was a scene, or if we could see her change into a different person in the reflection. I don't think so, but that would have been kind of interesting. So now that she has the shoes on, we get another close-up of the feet to demonstrate how she is a different person in these shoes. And she's walking with more confidence, and then we hear the guy hitting on her again, and she just says, "Buzz off, creep." And I thought that this was a very nice and succinct intro to the central concept of the episode. Like, I feel like if people weren't aware of what the situation was going to be, and if people weren't... didn't have the knowledge of the original episode when they went and saw this episode, they got a pretty clear indication of what the central concept of the episode is. They got a very clear indication of what is going on and what is happening with these shoes and everything. And I think that's a really, really good and succinct way to introduce the concept. And so we get more of the close-up with the shoes, and like I put in my notes, they are really going for it with the close-ups of the feet. Like, I would wager a guess that Quentin Tarantino loves this episode. But realistically, I think that it's a little too much. Like, it's kind of veers into kind of one-trick pony kind of stuff. But it does show the kind of different personality, I guess, so it is fine. So then we see that she goes to the Montgomery estate, and she goes to Kyle's home, and she gets out of the cab. And when the cab driver says, "Hey, lady, it's $18.20," she just throws her entire purse at him and says, "Keep the change." And I kind of laughed at how really just how silly that is, because it's so over the top. And I mean, it does have a purpose. It is so that Inez will have an excuse to get the purse, or it's contriving that she'll get the purse and see the ID and everything. But like, my only note, I have a snarky note about this. I just put, they did a lot of cocaine in the 80s. Because it just seems so weird for her to just throw her entire purse. Although maybe not, because honestly, she's Susan in that, and that's not her purse. That's Maddie's purse. It doesn't belong to her. She doesn't care. But I don't know. So at this point, I realized, like, oh, I bet that Jeffrey Tambor murdered his wife in this episode. And that's what the whole thing is. It's pretty clear, given, the context of what happened in the original episode. It's a fair kind of, a fair assumption to make in this episode. So we see her ring the doorbell, and Inez answers, and Susan in Maddie's body immediately greets the dog and like says like, "Oh, you missed your mother," and all that. It's kind of funny, but it's interesting because I really like Helen Mirren. I think that she does a phenomenal job in this episode, because she's really selling that whole idea of Maddie or Susan thinking that she's Susan. Like, Helen Mirren thinks that she's Susan in this scenario. She knows who she is. So much so that she threatens Inez, because she is giving her grief about being a stranger being in the house and everything. And it's just that confidence and that air of superiority is really, really palpable and really strong. And, it's done really, really well by Helen Mirren. So then she goes upstairs to take a bath and change her clothes. And I really like that she says like, "Oh yeah, take this dress and burn it." I thought that was kind of funny. But then Inez, okay. So she takes the shoes off, which I felt like the whole the kind of contrivance, I guess, or the setup of her taking the shoes off by having her draw a bath was really, really, really good. Like, that makes perfect sense. That's really that's a really good way to set up her taking off the shoes. And then now she has changed back into Maddie, and she's confused. And again, Helen Mirren is just so great in this. And this is where we get Inez coming back with the purse, saying like, "Hey, the cab driver said that you gave him this. He took $20 out for the fare." what's going on. And I really like how this scene between the two of them illustrates the change in the power dynamics. So when Inez talks to Susan, she's trying to be like, she's confused. On the stairs, she is talking to her and she's confused, but she is taking somewhat of a stance with her, saying like, hey, you can't be here. You're not, like, I don't know who you are. I need to confirm with Kyle. And then when Susan like demonstrates to Inez that she is Susan, she kind of flexes her power on her, and that dynamic is very evident. So then when Inez is then talking to Maddie with the ID and everything, she is talking to her like, oh, she is a stranger. She's an intruder. Inez now has power over her. And I just kind of think that there's a level of power dynamic at play there that's really satisfying. And so she puts the shoes back on, and then she's walking out, and she passes by, or no, she puts the shoes back on, and then she gets dressed, and as she's walking down the stairs, when she gets downstairs, she passes by a mirror, and that's when we see the reflection of Susan instead of Maddie. And it's fine. Like, it's fine. I feel like that was a little too direct. And also, I think that it felt like the classic, like, TV thing where, like, oh, if they don't understand what's happening now, we need to make it very clear that what's happening now. They're literally different people. So, I don't know. Anyway, it was fine. So, then we have Susan calling Kyle, and I think that it's interesting. The phone call instead of an in-person confrontation is kind of neat. If a little bit lacking, comparatively to the scene with Bernie and Dane in the original episode, like the scene at the nightclub at the table. But this was fine. It was cool because you can see how Kyle doesn't recognize the voice. He's trying to figure out what's going on. And you just hear the confidence in Helen Mirren's performance there that I really appreciate. And I really like the dialogue that she says, the line that she says, how can you make threats to someone you've already killed? And I thought that was great, because that's confirmation that he killed her. And so then I really liked this as a nod to the original episode, because she says she's about to fix a Manhattan, saying that it's his favorite drink. And I thought that was kind of a cool reverse of the drink from the original, in a sense. That's how she demonstrates that, she is who she says she is, similar to how Dane demonstrates that that's who he is in the original episode. I kind of like that. And so the purpose of the phone call is really to beckon him home and to trap him, to bring him home and trap him so that she can murder him. And that's fine. It's totally fine. But just to reiterate, I really like Helen Mirren in this episode. She has this demeanor about her, this confidence. It's really cool. And she is, when they're in the house, she's really taking him to task. She's explaining that he murdered her, and she goes into detail saying that like, I never thought that I would hit, during that time, I never thought that I would even hit the ground because it was so high up and everything, and you killed me. It's really cool. And as she's saying these things, as she's talking to him, he slaps her so hard that she falls back on the couch, and it's strong. It's violent. And I like the kind of retort that she gives to him, saying like, oh, and that's the Kyle I know all too well, or something like that. It's demonstrating that he's an abuser and he's abusive and everything, which, one of my issues with this episode is that it doesn't really give a compelling reason why he murdered her, aside from him just being an abusive a-hole. Which is that's fine enough for the story and everything, but in comparison to the original episode, when we have Dane explaining why he was murdered, so succinctly, so directly, and then here we have like, oh, she was just on the balcony and he pushed her and she died. Like, there's not really not that I could tell, or maybe I missed it, but there's not really something that really brought out that anger in him to murder her. So I don't know. I kind of wish that that was handled a little bit differently. So throughout this entire interaction, Inez is watching, and Kyle just kind of assumes that Maddie was there. He kind of he sort of admits to it and everything, but he's trying to kind of weasel out of it. He's trying to get out of the entire this very sticky situation he's found himself in. And I think Jeffrey Tambor does a really good job in this episode. I mean, this is Helen Mirren's episode through and through. Like, it is her performance. She's amazing in this. But Jeffrey Tambor really holds his own and does a good job as well. So I respect that as well. So I also, okay, so then after that, Susan gets up and kisses Kyle to prove that it's her, which again is a nice nod to the original episode, and kind of it's a cool moment. But then everything escalates, and we get the kind of big climax of the episode where he runs to get the gun, but she already has it. She fires at him and chases him out the door, and it was pretty cool because as she's running out the door, we see Susan in the reflection again, and then we see Inez calling the police. And so in this moment, there is this foot chase through like through like an affluent neighborhood, and it's fine. Like, it's okay. I kept thinking like, okay, this is kind of silly. It's a little silly. It's like heightening the action and drama and everything, because why not? But then Susan takes the shoes off, and because she's like, I can't run in these high heels, like damn these shoes. And she takes them off, and she instantly turns into Maddie. And I thought, that's pretty great. That's a pretty cool way to switch it up and kind of do something unique with it. Because she sees the shoes, she sees that she's holding a gun, she's confused, she doesn't know where she is, so she throws the gun in the grass and throws the shoes in the trash and walks away, just completely confused. And I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a really cool change up, or a really unique way to kind of conclude the climactic moment of the episode. So then we get a cut to later where the police are at the Montgomery estate, and Kyle is asking for a favor to not let this go public because he might lose business and everything. And now that his wife is dead, his work is his life and everything. Also, the lieutenant that he's talking to, I didn't catch his name, but his acting is not great. It's a little bit awkward. He's going a little too hard with it, but whatever. So then we get the kind of final scene with, one of the final scenes with Kyle and Inez. And so what happens is that they have the conversation. Kyle asks him if she ever got the woman's name, and she says no, like a liar, because she had her name, because she had the ID. But she knows who she's working for. She knows the type of person that she's working for, and she's not going to work for him any longer. And before she can give her notice, he fires her and says, I'll give you a month's severance. That's, of course, and everything. And she's like, that's fine. I was going to quit anyway. And then, and then she asks if he believes in ghosts, and he says, yeah, just get out of here. And so she walks out, and I thought in that moment, I kind of thought and kind of hoped that she would turn around and just shoot him, and then it would reveal that she was wearing the shoes and that it wasn't Inez he was talking to, but Susan. But that's not what happened, but that's fine. So she leaves. That's the end for Inez. And then we see a shot from the street of a different housekeeper from another house, coming out, finding the shoes in the trash, putting them on, and then the camera pans up and we see like this devilish smile across her face, and she walks across the street to Kyle's house. And I really like the almost zombie-like walk that she does, because it is very, very, it is very much a possession sort of thing. And I had this idea, or I had this thought that it's kind of unsettling or eerie to think of just a, like your wife that you murdered, coming back for you to murder you in an endless stream of people who just find her shoes. I just kind of like that. And and then we get the closing narration, and then we get a gunshot, and I'm going to go ahead and play the closing narration right now.
As we walk through life, if we learn nothing else, we learn the only sure things are death and taxes. Well, 1 out of 2 isn't bad. And haven't we all said you can't take it with you? Another comforting adage, without exceptions in the real world, that somehow goes all wonky when considering exit lines delivered in the Twilight Zone.
So overall, I thought that this remake of Dead Man's Shoes was pretty interesting. It was solid. It was okay. It was all in all, it was pretty okay. Again, one of the faults that I had with it, or one of the issues I had with it, was that there wasn't enough of a backstory, or enough of a reason, not necessarily even a reason, but not enough of a detail about the reason why he murdered his wife. I thought that maybe, like, even if it was something as rudimentary in a narrative perspective as, like, she found out that he was cheating on him or cheating on her, and that's why he murdered her, or what have you. I just feel like we needed something, and that didn't really deliver on that. But all in all, I thought that this was a pretty enjoyable remake, and a pretty solid episode of TV. The more and more I watch like these like episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone, which, now that I think about it, this is the last one I'm going to watch for a while until I cover it on the show proper. But I'm kind of curious to go back and watch more, especially because I was looking through my DVD and my DVD like pamphlet, and there are so many directors that worked on this show that it just caught my eye. Like, I know Wes Craven directed some episodes, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just eager to get to that eventually. But anyway, that's very, very, very far in the future. So those are my thoughts on Dead Woman's Shoes. And now I'm going to conclude the episode with my thoughts on the 2002 remake, Dead Man's Eyes. So let me know what you thought about Dead Woman's Shoes, and then stay tuned for my thoughts on the 2002 Twilight Zone episode, Dead Man's Eyes.
We're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are only that of the imagination. You're entering the Twilight Zone.
All right, and now I'm going to be concluding the episode with my thoughts on Dead Man's Eyes from the Twilight Zone 2002 iteration. It was, let me scroll down to my notes there, but so it's Dead Man's Eyes. It is the remake of Dead Man's Shoes and Dead Woman's Shoes, although it's kind of interesting because it's not really a remake. It takes so many more liberties than Dead Woman's Shoes did. In my estimation, to really good effect, honestly. So, okay. So, like I said, this is available on YouTube. There's a link in the show notes so you can watch the entire episode. So Dead Man's Eyes is the second segment of the fourth episode from the 2002 Twilight Zone revival on UPN, and it originally aired on October 9th, 2002. And before I get into the actual review and everything, I kind of struggled to have notes for how I would have remade it for the 2002 revival, specifically because I don't know how I would have. I probably would have gone a route similar to kind of how I mentioned in my review of Dead Man's Shoes, kind of similar to like the the Drawing of the Three, the Dark Tower Book 2, where basically in that book, Roland Deschain, the gunslinger, he inhabits the like body of a heroin junkie in 1980s New York on a plane, who's smuggling heroin into New York, and it's a whole thing. They're fighting. They have arguments about who's taking control of the body. It's really interesting. But I probably would have ripped off Stephen King and done that if I were to remake it. But I also would have brought back the criminal aspect of it, and maybe not so far as to be like a gangster storyline like in the original episode, but something maybe a little more early 2000s, kind of like how Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone handled The Who of You in season 2, which like when I wrote that in my notes, all I thought was, wait, okay, that episode really does feel like a spiritual remake of Dead Man's Eyes, of Dead Man's Shoes. And if you can allow yourself that, then you can technically say that Dead Man's Shoes is an episode of Twilight Zone that was remade in all the TV revivals of the Twilight Zone. But I digress. So, as far as remaking it for the 2002 series, like I said, kind of like how Jordan Peele handled The Who of You, making it a relatable character, making it a sympathetic character kind of down on his luck. That would have been an interesting route, but I don't know how that could have translated into a revenge plot, because that is kind of the cornerstone of this story, is it's about revenge. And I don't know. Couldn't really do that. So, really though, at the end of the day, after watching the 1985 version, I really would have made it a priority to make the reason for the revenge much clearer than in Dead Woman's Shoes. So that would have been my kind of approach to it in the 2002 remake on the UPN Twilight Zone. So, the plot summary, courtesy of IMDb. Once again, before I get into this, I'm going to be spoiling the entirety of the episode, so go check it out on YouTube and come back and listen. So, okay. The plot summary for Dead Man's Eyes, courtesy of IMDb, is a distraught widow on the verge of a mental breakdown discovers that her murdered husband's eyeglasses reveal the last moments of his life and possibly the identity of the killer. This episode stars Portia de Rossi as Laurel Janis, Kristen Lehman as Becca, William DeVry as Nick Janis. I almost said Nick Jonas. Dion Luther as Stanley Coe, and Peter Kalamis as Lou Gallo. And a quick note about the cast. A couple things. One is that Kristen Lehman was the therapist in Meet in the Middle, which was the season 2 premiere of the Twilight Zone, the Monkey Paw Productions, Jordan Peele produced Twilight Zone reboot. So she played a therapist in Meet in the Middle. And if I'm remembering correctly, I could be completely wrong, but I feel like she's doing like that therapist thing where she has eyeglasses and she's kind of like using them like to kind of think about stuff or something. I don't know, like having it kind of at the corner of her mouth, like, that's interesting. I think I might be making that up, but if so, that's an interesting kind of that's an interesting little reference, I guess, to Dead Man's Eyes. And also Peter Kalamis, who plays Lou Gallo, the DA, he appeared in Not All Men from season 1 of the 2019 Twilight Zone reboot. So that's interesting. And the other thing, like, I'm kind of tickled by this, that Portia de Rossi is the lead actress in this episode. And what I find interesting about that is that she's the lead actress, and one of the leads in the 1985 Dead Woman's Shoes was Jeffrey Tambor. And like that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because they coincidentally would go on to be in Arrested Development as George Bluth Sr. and oh my God, what Lindsay Bluth, Lindsay Funke. So I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of an interesting little thing there. Writer for the episode was Frederick Rappaport, and director was Jerry Levine. So, let me go ahead and go into my thoughts on Dead Man's Eyes. So, we open on a close-up of Portia de Rossi and her eyes, basically. And just immediately in my notes, that's kind of neat. Portia de Rossi stars in this ep. Jeffrey Tambor was in Dead Woman's Shoes. So we are immediately in a courtroom scene, and the way that it fades into it, and then reveals the courtroom scene, really reminds me of Shadowplay a little bit. The way that both versions of Shadowplay were introduced with the courtroom scene. And I find that kind of interesting because Shadowplay was remade in the 80s as well. And I just think that that's kind of interesting. Oh, yeah, because this is the 2002 one. Okay, yeah. I just got all jumbled in my head. But I just think that that's kind of interesting. So anyway, we are given the immediate backstory right off the bat that this is a trial against Stanley Coe for the murder of Nicholas Janis, and the jury sentences him to only 15 years in prison for the murder of Nick. And right from there, we get a very, very quick opening narration by Forrest Whitaker, and I'm actually going to go ahead and play that here.
No! That son of a bitch killed my husband! You don't deserve to live! This isn't justice, it's a joke.
Born into a life of wealth and privilege, Laurel Janis has always gotten exactly what she wants. But with the murder of her husband, Laurel's life of luxury has been shattered. Now, all she wants is to see justice done. A justice that can only be found in the Twilight Zone.
So right off the bat, I find this really interesting that we are following the widow of a murder victim who is going to have to get revenge. That's presumably what the case is. She's going to have to get revenge on the murder of her husband because the court failed her, and the court did not give him like the death sentence or anything. And right from the bat, I was trying to figure out, like, okay, how is this going to be? Because he's in prison and everything. Like, I was very slow on the uptake because this episode is much more than that. What I find interesting is that it presupposes that we are expecting the revenge plot. We're expecting her to try to find a way to murder Stanley Coe in prison because he murdered her husband. But it goes much deeper than that and becomes a mystery and becomes this mystery, supernatural horror kind of thing. And I've got to say, I was really impressed with this. I was surprisingly very, very impressed with this. So yeah, but I'll get all of that. I'll get to all of that as I go on. But overall, I really liked this idea from the outset of a widow seeking revenge for the murder of her husband, because we already know at this point, this is very different from the previous iterations of the story, because we have the reason, we have the motive for her seeking revenge. We have enough detail up front that we can run with and really follow the character with. And even then, I like, there's like a little piece of dialogue where Laurel says that Nick got his brains bashed in, and just the casualness or the not necessarily casualness, but the way that detail is just given to us right up front is really interesting, because we know how he dies up front and we know what happens and everything. So that I find that to be pretty interesting. So after the courtroom has settled down and Laurel is walking out with her best friend Becca, before that, she asks for all of Nick's belongings, and she says that she just wants the things that he had the night of his death, which I found to be kind of weird. It doesn't really make sense to me why she would want those objects immediately, like those specific objects. Later in the episode, it is revealed that it's been 2 years where she's been living with this and everything. She has this shrine or this kind of obsession board, really, with newspaper clippings and all of these things. So she's been living in this. So I guess maybe to complete her like shrine to him, I guess, or just really to have his effects, have his things again. So she asks for his things, and then she gets to the car, and she starts going through it. She gets his wallet out, and then his glasses, which she sets on the dashboard. And then there's a gold watch that says, "Never take this off, love, Laurel," which at that point, she starts breaking down, sobbing in the car. And I really like the music and her performance in that scene, because it's really demonstrating the grief of Laurel. And it is really selling just the pain of justice not being served in her mind, which by effect makes the reveal at the end of the episode all the more powerful and unexpected, because this is such a genuine moment. So it sets it up really well here. So as she's crying and trying to regain composure, she notices this shimmer in the lenses of the glasses. And right from the outset, right there, I know this is going to be different from the other two stories. This is going to be very different, because it's like the glasses are beckoning her. It's like the glasses are trying to get her to put them on, basically. And I just kind of like that. I kind of like that as this interesting, like, oh, you need to, like a beckoning thing, really. And once she has them on, she sees blurry stuff, because, yeah, they're not her glasses. And then she sees Nick's reflection in the rearview mirror. And I found that to be very interesting right from the outset, because my immediate thought is, oh, she's conscious of that. She's conscious that that she is inhabiting another, that someone else is inhabiting her body, because I wasn't aware that it was going to go a completely different direction. And then that's when we get the intro music, which I've got to say, like I said about the 1980s version, I much prefer the 2002 opening theme music for that version of the Twilight Zone, because it is much, much better than the 80s version, which I'm sure I've said before on the podcast, but, forgive me. So right from after the credits, or after the opening theme, we get the opening credits, and we get to see her massive estate, like cliffside or beach, not beachside, but kind of cliffside, like decadent house. And we see the newspaper clippings that reveal that she's a socialite and her husband was slain, obviously. And then we get more backstory. We get Becca saying that it's been 2 years since Nick's death, and Laurel kind of preemptively swears that she's still sober, because there's a scene earlier when they're walking out of the courtroom where she says that she's been sober for a few months, I think. And so she preemptively says, like, no, I'm still sober. This is weird. Something weird happened with the glasses, and I'm sober for it. And I found this whole aspect really to be really interesting, that they're going for a see the world through his eyes mental passenger route, which again, at this point, I started to really hope that it was going to be similar to the drawing of the three. Like, I was hoping that when she puts on the glasses, she's able to communicate with her dead husband, but that's not the case. But I still just kind of liked that little tiny sliver of similarity to the Dark Tower series, which again, check out Tower Junkies for a bunch of Stephen King related stuff and very, very little Dark Tower stuff, despite the name of the podcast. So Becca then kind of just lays it out for Laurel and says that it's time to move on, and you need to take down all of these things, get rid of his belongings. Wow, why am I? Whoa, that was so weird. I could not get that word out. Get rid of his belongings and move on. And I really like that, because it is setting up the subtle setup of her being revealed or falsely revealed as the killer. It's setting this up because she is, and I bought this hook, line, and sinker. It's setting it up as she wants her to move on. She is maybe sort of believing this weird vision thing, and she doesn't want to get caught as the killer. That's what the show wants us to think, and that's what I bought so hard immediately. And so I really like how it is subverting those expectations, or throwing out these very well placed red herrings, in my opinion. So after that, we get this montage of Laurel just tearing down the shrine, and the music playing is kind of goofy. It's like this early 2000s rock, like kind of, I don't know how to explain it, like electronic rock or something. It just feels very, very dated. And as she's doing this, she sees the glasses again, and it's like they're beckoning to her. And even so far as the light next to her kind of twinkling out and blinking out. And I really like that because it goes far to demonstrate the power of the Twilight Zone element here. Like, it wants her to take them, the glasses want her to take them and put them on her face so that she can see the truth. And that is something that I find really, really interesting in the grand scheme of things, because at the end of the episode, we discover that she is the killer, and that she has been living a life of denial, and she is blind to the fact that she is the one who murdered her husband. And so much so that she has deluded herself into not accepting the truth. And it's like the glasses are, there's a read of this episode that I believe that this episode can be read as no Twilight Zone element, no supernatural stuff at all. I feel like there's a read of this that could be that she is having that mental breakdown, as evidenced by the fact that she's in an asylum at the end of the episode. But I feel like the glasses could be in her imagination. Like, the power of the glasses could be in her imagination, and she could be just struggle, like it could be her subconscious trying to guide her and get her to the realization that she is the person who murdered her husband. So I just find that to be pretty interesting. I think that that's an interesting read of it. But anyway, so we kind of cut to a scene later where she's kind of taking a sip of a drink. I couldn't really tell if it was supposed to be tea, water, or alcohol. I'm assuming that it was water or tea, because the only reason I thought that it might be alcohol is that I thought that maybe the episode was going to go down that route where she's losing her sobriety. But I don't think that's the case, because it never really comes up again. So, at least in the present day. So she eyes the glasses again. She puts them on, and they're blurry again. That's another thing that makes me think that there is a read of this where she is imagining the supernatural stuff so that she can, come to terms with the fact that she is the murderer. Because every time she puts on the glasses, the first few times she puts on the glasses, at least, the first images we see is this blurry world, because she's putting on someone else's glasses with someone else's prescription. And it's not like an instantaneous thing where she's instantly seeing Nick's perspective. It's like her brain is switching to like reality to this supernatural kind of thing that she has invented for herself. So I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I really like that kind of that kind of read of it. So she then takes the glasses off and takes the box of his belongings outside. And again, as she's putting it on, or as she's putting the boxes away, I think she might be putting them out for the garbage or whatever. The glasses kind of shimmer again, and it's like they're beckoning to her. And at this point, I just found, I thought that it was kind of interesting. Still, I found it interesting that the possession, if you want to call it that, isn't instantaneous in this iteration like it was in previous installments. And what I find really interesting and strong about that change is that by default, the fact that the supernatural element, the Twilight Zone element of this episode, it gives Laurel more of an uphill climb toward exacting her revenge and finding out the truth. And by virtue of it not being as easy as just putting on the glasses and instantly becoming Nick. She has to work out the machinations of the glasses, and only then does she get to avenge her husband. That was my read of it at that point. But really, it's only then does she get to find out the truth. So she puts him on the third time, and then that's when we finally get, like, her acceptance of it, and she starts seeing a replay of what Nick saw the night that he died. And it's basically a replay of the night, and he's caught, or he's going up to the door to the house, and he is accosted by his former business partner. And I had to stop here, and I was like, okay, this is really interesting because it's taking the concept of Dead Man's Shoes and running with it in such a unique storyline and putting its own unique spin on it. And I just really found myself really liking it quite a bit at that point. So then at this point in the vision, we get all the backstory. We get Stan revealing that he's Nick's ex-partner and he's been trying to contact Nick, but Nick has been blowing him off and says that he hasn't been checking his messages. And then that's when Laurel takes the glasses off again because she's overwhelmed. And so she goes inside and puts them back on. And at that point, I was like, okay, just keep the glasses on. For the love of God, I want to know what's happening. And it's even interesting because it reminds me a little bit of the 2020 Twilight Zone or 2019 Twilight Zone reboot from Jordan Peele, the episode Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. With Adam Scott, because he's listening to the podcast and he keeps pausing it and reacting to things. And that was a big point of contention with people that were reviewing the Twilight Zone reboot. But I kind of like that as like this timestamp thing. But here it gets a little bit, it's getting a little bit much. Like I just want her to keep the glasses on. But when she goes inside, she puts them back on. And at that point, we're almost at full flashback mode. Like we have an extended scene where Stan is angry. He's yelling at Nick, and Nick says that he's been busy. He's had to take Laurel back into rehab, and that she keeps leaving on her own and everything. And so Stan then reveals that he knows that Nick has been keeping a separate set of books for the company, and he's been bleeding it dry and stealing from Stan and the company itself. And then she sees Stan starting to attack Nick, and that's when she takes the glasses off. And then the next scene, we have her talking to Becca, and she mentions that the glasses were frying her brain, which I found that to be an interesting turn of phrase because she is sober. The show has been showing us that she is sober and telling us that she's sober, no more pills or booze or anything. And this is a very, very, very weak metaphor and it doesn't work at all. But at that point I was thinking, I kind of wonder if the glasses are like a metaphor for drugs, like it's frying her brain to use them. But I think that's it's pretty weak and doesn't really track. So it's probably not worthy of bringing up. But yeah. So anyway, so Laurel is talking to Becca and says that she mentions like, oh, it's so bizarre because they were in the kitchen and Nick's body was found in the upstairs bathroom. And at that moment I was like, okay, this episode just got even better for me because it is now implementing this mystery element to the story. And that's something I was not expecting. And I love it because it is very, very effectively hiding the reveal at the end. Because then Becca asks, like, why are you torturing yourself? Like, you can't change anything. It's in the past. You need to move on. I'm going to a cabin. Let me take you there so that we can hang out and just be alone and everything. But Laurel needs to know what happened. She needs that closure. And I love that because Becca saying that, oh, hey, let's go to a cabin, a secluded cabin and everything. It implants in our mind like, oh, okay, well, Becca is probably the killer. And she's trying to get Laurel away from the trail of figuring that out. And I love that. I think that that's really effective storytelling given the reveal at the end of the episode. So then there's a break. where Laurel checks her messages, and the DA's office calls and says that the Court of Appeals is granting a new trial for Stanley Coe, and that Laurel is going to have to testify again. And I don't know, this feels like a pretty superfluous scene. But I do like I think the energy of the voicemail is kind of funny. Like, oh, you're going to have to testify again. Okay, bye. It's slightly cheery despite the dialogue, but also it kind of feels like, I don't know, like it kind of feels like like I said, a superfluous scene, but also it makes me feel for Laurel and makes me, it gives her an excuse to continue with the glasses, because it gives her a real world situation in which she is okay with, or she's given justification for ignoring Becca's suggestion. So she also kind of says to herself out loud to no one, she says, "This time I'll have more to say," and grabs the glasses with like renewed purpose. And I kind of like that. So then we get another flashback through her POV, through Nick's POV, through the glasses, and we see Nick and Stan struggling. Stan grabs what looks like a snow globe, but apparently it's a trophy, and he's about to bash his brains in, and then he stops himself and says, "Oh, you're not worth it," and then he sets it down and leaves. And that's when we and Laurel know that Stan didn't actually do it. And then we get this cutaway, or not cutaway, but the next scene is her talking to the DA, to Lou. And he doesn't believe her. And then I really liked this element because she then asks him to release Coe and reopen the case. And I just really like that because Lou says, "I'm sorry, Laurel, but visions aren't admissible in court." And I kind of like that because it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's also just really showing us the level of insanity, that, for lack of a better word, like how unhinged this whole scenario is, and how much of a Twilight Zone element it is. It also serves to create in us the suspicion that Lou is the killer, which isn't the case and is patently ridiculous because he's the DA. Like, it's just, that would have been so far-fetched and weird. But in the back of my mind, I was like, well, maybe Lou's the killer, and that's why he doesn't want to reopen the case, which is silly and dumb. But I do like that we have that kind of subtle alternate killer possibilities. So she puts the glasses back on, and we see Nick stumbling up to the bathroom. And then at this point, I'm like, okay, Becca is the only possible alternative killer. Like, that is literally the only possibility. And then at that point, I'm like, well, maybe Lou the DA, but that's silly and dumb. But we see Nick is cleaning up. He's looking in the mirror, and then he hears someone outside. And that's when I'm like, oh, yeah, it's Becca. Okay, Becca's the killer. And that's the reveal that she was having an affair with him. And he says, like, oh, I'm going to leave Laurel, and you're going to be, like, I want to be with you, but I need to leave Laurel first. And, yeah. So, at that point, Laurel is interrupted by Becca, who comes back and calls for her because she came to pick her up to go to the cabin. And what I liked about this is that it cuts from the flashback, it cuts from the vision with enough information that I don't even think at this point that she even saw that Becca was having an affair. All she saw was that he was there, or maybe she did see that. But anyway, I just like that because now we're coming to the climax. We're coming to the end of the episode, and this is where things are going to converge, and the truth is going to come out in an unexpected way. And I just really like the storytelling of that. So, again, I just really like how this episode is subverting expectations, our expectations that are based on the knowledge from the original series episode, because because in the original series episode, there are two gangsters who, one murders the other because the other wants to do something business related that he doesn't want to do, and so he's murdered. So this episode is subverting our expectations based on that, because we're introduced to the business people, and we're told that he's the killer, but it is just not the case at all. And we're slowly learning what the truth is. And I just really like that, how it's playing with the audience. So as Laurel comes out and comes down the stairs, Becca calls her out on the glasses and says that you need to give it up. You need to stop. You need to move on and everything. And then that's when she grabs Laurel's wrist and the glasses break against the wall, which I've got to say was a little cheesy. Very, like, the blocking was not that good. Like, it was like, it just needs it needed maybe a different way to have the glasses break. But I do kind of like that the glasses break, and I'm just now realizing like how much of a pointed reference that has to be to Time Enough at Last. I kind of like that. So that's when Laurel turns the tables, oh how the turntables, on Becca and says, "You were sleeping with him, weren't you?" And then Becca comes clean and says, "It was an accident, it didn't mean to happen." And so that's when they start fighting. And Laurel then comes to the conclusion that Becca killed Nick. And Becca then claims that Nick was dead when she got there, which I thought, again, okay, so at this point, I had no idea that it was going to reveal that Laurel was actually the killer. I was bought into this whole idea that Becca was actually the killer. I was right there with Laurel. And so the reveal at the end is just so well done, because at this moment when Becca says that, "No, Nick was dead when I got there," I'm like, well, no, he wasn't, because we just saw you there, you liar. I'm like, I just thought that was really, really effective. So the episode gets a little bit of a contrivance here, with Laurel running up the stairs and going into, I think it was the same bathroom where Nick died, and she locks the door. She locks herself in there, and she's having like a breakdown, and she's trying to fix the glasses. And I thought that was a little bit contrived, but it got us to the big reveal, which is that she puts the glasses on and she starts seeing it again. And that's when Nick says that he was going to leave Laurel. And so that's when we see Becca come in and start to kill him or hit him over the back of the head with the trophy, which is really cool, which is a really cool setup for that scene, because he's looking in the mirror and it's in the reflection that we see her swing it. And so I'm like, oh wow, yeah, Becca did kill him. Okay. And then she comes into the light and we see the hair and we see that it's Laurel, and she is just going to town on him and just beating him unmercifully. And I just love that. I was like, no, wait, that's Laurel. Holy crap. Okay. And like, I was so floored by that. I thought it was such a fun twist. And I thought that it was really well done. And then with that reveal, we get a cut to the police showing up, and we have Becca taking the police up the stairs. They break open the door, and then it switches immediately to Laurel in like a padded cell saying, "I know who killed him. It was me. It's me. It's me." And then that's when we get Forrest Whitaker's closing narration, which I'll play right now.
It's me.
Laurel Janice's vision of justice has finally come into focus. The verdict? Guilty. Guilty of a life lived in complete denial. And now, serving out her sentence in a lonely corner of the Twilight Zone.
And there we have it, the end of Dead Man's Eyes. I've got to say, I kind of feel like I have, at least in the past, kind of written off the 2002 Twilight Zone revival. And granted, I've only seen a few episodes. I saw, is it Rewind with, God, what's his name? Finch from American Pie. I can't remember his name. Anyway, Eddie K. Thomas. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, with him, and then of course I saw Eye of the Beholder and The Monsters Are on Maple Street. And I also saw one other one I can't remember. Oh, whatever the one was with I think Gil Bellows and the Penn Badgley. I can't remember what that episode was called, but I've seen a handful of these episodes, and honestly, like I think I've been kind of hard on it a little bit over the years, but rewatching it now, like watching this episode, I'm actually pretty impressed with it. And again, the storytelling in this episode specifically was just fantastic. I really, really liked it. So yeah, I think to kind of close out this episode of Anthology, I've got to say, very impressed with this 2002 version. And I really liked the way that it subverted expectations. I think of these 3 episodes, I would still probably rank Dead Man's Shoes high, because, I mean, it's the original series. You can't really compete with that. And I would put the 2002 version right below it and have the 1985 version in last place. And then The Who of You, I think, since that's sort of a spiritual remake of it to an extent, I would probably put that above the 1985 version. And maybe, I mean, I would put it kind of toe-to-toe with 2002's Dead Man's Eyes, because The Who of You has an incredible performance by Ethan Embry. So anyway, I guess that'll do it for this episode of Anthology. Let me know what you thought about all of these episodes. And once again, my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer did get access to all 3 of these segments a few days early. I posted my Dead Man's Shoes reviews on Sunday, and then Monday was Dead Woman's Shoes, and then Tuesday was Dead Man's Eyes, and then I'm posting this, I think, either probably Thursday. So just keep in mind, if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is go to Patreon and become a Patreon supporter for a monthly payment. Depending on what tier you're at, you get tons of audio content that's bonus and exclusive just to Patreon, depending on the the tier that you get in. I will say this, the $2 a month tier, I put way too much content out there. TV and book reviews and TV and movie reactions, all the stuff is on the $2 tier. And then $5 tier has all of that, plus, movie commentary tracks and stuff. So if you're in a giving mood and want to support the show, check out patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, and help me pay the bills. And so that should do it for this episode of Anthology. Next time, I should be able to get an episode out next week, because I know that I had a little bit of a week hiatus last week. I wanted to get this episode out last week, but didn't get around to it. But next week on the show, I'm going to be reviewing the Twilight Zone Season 3, Episode 19, The Hunt, and my bonus review will be for Target Hurricane from Science Fiction Theater. It's Season 1, Episode 26, so look forward to that next week. And then after that, I'm going to be doing Show Dance with Rance McGrew. I don't know much about it. I just think that that's an interesting title. So, okay. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you for supporting us and everything. Let me know what you thought about this episode, these few episodes, and I'll see you in the next episode. And now, enjoy this short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. For the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, such as early access to episodes, TV, book, and movie reviews and reaction recordings, commentary tracks, and Patreon potpourri episodes, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. The actor who plays Dustin, Gaten Maserati, I don't remember his name, but I think I said in another review, he is phenomenal in this season. Like, he is absolutely incredible, and he's great when he's going after Eddie. He's a phenomenal actor in this season, so I'm very, very happy with his performance. And that performance at the end is just heartbreaking. Like, it made me well up with tears a little bit. But anyway.
This podcast was edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find links to all of our shows at ObsessiveViewer.com/podcasts. For exclusive bonus content, including reviews, commentaries, and B-roll episodes, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/ObsessiveViewer. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.